September 12, 1944. 7:15 p.m. Sumter County, Georgia, Fellowship Hall. A military truck idles outside as an MP's shout slices the humid dark. "Return to barracks!" Inside, under paper streamers and a pump organ's last chord, church women knot a blue ribbon around a warm peach pie. Not contraband. A message. Across the road, a barbed wire gate frames a figure. An interned German woman, eyes fixed on the parcel she's been promised if the captain. September 12, 1944. 7:15 p.m. Sumter County, Georgia, Fellowship Hall. A military truck idles outside as an MP's shout slices the humid dark. "Return to barracks!" Inside, under paper streamers and a pump organ's last chord, church women knot a blue ribbon around a warm peach pie. Not contraband. A message. Across the road, a barbed wire gate frames a figure. An interned German woman, eyes fixed on the parcel she's been promised if the captain allows it. Orders say distance. The social says neighbor. A handoff at the fence will test which rule governs tonight. Regulation or mercy wrapped in gingham and peaches. The shout still hangs in the rafters when the captain squares his shoulders and studies the pie as if the ribbon were a regulation he does not recognize. The church elder at my side clears his throat the way he does before grace and says, gentle but steady, that it is just food for a neighbor. No message, no favor, only peaches, sugar, and the habit of kindness learned long before the war. The MP by the door repeats the command with a professional flatness that makes the hymn board numbers tremble in their wooden. September 12, 1944. 7:15 p.m. Sumter County, Georgia, Fellowship Hall. A military truck idles outside as an MP's shout slices the humid dark. "Return to barracks!" Inside, under paper streamers and a pump organ's last chord, church women knot a blue ribbon around a warm peach pie. Not contraband. A message. Across the road, a barbed wire gate frames a figure. An interned German woman, eyes fixed on the parcel she's been promised if the captain allows it. Orders say distance. The social says neighbor. A handoff at the fence will test which rule governs tonight. Regulation or mercy wrapped in gingham and peaches. The shout still hangs in the rafters when the captain. September 12, 1944. 7:15 p.m. Sumter County, Georgia, Fellowship Hall. A military truck idles outside as an MP's shout slices the humid dark. "Return to barracks!" Inside, under paper streamers and a pump organ's last chord, church women knot a blue ribbon around a warm peach pie. Not contraband. A message. Across the road, a barbed wire gate frames a figure. An interned German woman, eyes fixed on the parcel she's been promised if the captain allows it. Orders say distance. The social says neighbor. A handoff at the fence will test which rule governs tonight. Regulation or mercy wrapped in gingham and peaches. The shout still hangs in the rafters when the captain squares his shoulders and studies the pie as if the ribbon were a regulation he does not recognize. The church elder at my side clears his throat the way he does before grace and says, gentle but steady, that it is just food for a neighbor. No message, no favor, only peaches, sugar, and the habit of kindness learned long before the war. The MP by the door repeats the command with a professional flatness that makes the hymn board numbers tremble in their wooden frame. I feel the room tighten. Paper streamers wink, the organ wheezes to quiet, and somewhere behind us, ice clinks in a tub as if time could be cooled into waiting. The captain lifts his chin toward the window where the fence sags in the distance and asks who baked it. "We all did," the elder answers, meaning the county's fields and the careful hands that turned summer into jars and jars until one could be spared for a night like this. Meaning also the pledge this congregation keeps to feed sorrow when it shows up in a dress or a uniform. The MP's jaw moves, weary from saying the same 6 words all day and finding they no longer fit this hour. I step forward, because the elder's voice is kindness and mine can be instructions. I explain the ribbon is not a code or a claim, only a way to carry the tin without burning palms, and that anyone who has pulled a pie from an oven knows a ribbon is a practical tool. The captain considers this as if the truth of it belongs to his jurisdiction now. He asks if we know the woman's name. We do not, I say, only that she wrote once of orchards, and we live among orchards, and that there is no propaganda in fruit baked properly. A slow nod moves through the women behind me like wind through wheat. The MP says the line again, "Return to barracks," but it lands differently, like a rule placed on the table for discussion instead of a brick dropped to end it. The elder repeats, "Just food for a neighbor," and I hear how the phrase gathers up all our daytime certainties and carries them, trembling, toward the fence. The captain's hand rests on the back of a chair, wedding band bright, and I think of how metal can mean vow or chain depending on who is holding it. He asks if there will be speeches. "No," I tell him, "only a handoff with eyes lowered, like Sunday, plates moving down a pew." He looks at the ribbon again, and I realize it has become a test strip for the air itself. Blue against brown tin, cloth against rule, softness against the hard edges we have lived with since the trucks came. The MP exhales. I do too. The captain closes his eyes a second, opens them, and says he will consider a way that is both within his orders and within his conscience, and that we will wait while he finds it. I set the pie down and feel the ribbon between my fingers, taut as a boundary and soft as a promise. And I understand that what we decide in this pause will travel with us long after the trucks are gone, because the world is always rebuilt in acts, and tonight everything rests on a strip of blue that looks like a hymnal line in light, as if it has learned to carry more meaning than its fabric can hold. We step into the wet dark with the pie balanced between my palms, the air a warm cloth heavy with honeysuckle and diesel. The women file behind me, shoes ticking on gravel, perspiration at their temples like faint halos. At the fence, the guard appears on the watch path, walking parallel inside the wire, flashlight lowered, boots careful, as if noise itself required authorization. I give my name, the church's name, and the purpose. Delivery of food prepared at a social for one internee, identified only by a letter. He returns his name and rank, confirms he may receive inquiries and relay determinations, but not decide. Permission, I say. Permission, he replies, the word moving like a small boat across a black river. He asks the contents of the tin, whether there is cutlery, whether any note is enclosed. Peach pie, I say. 1 ribbon, no utensil, no message. Behind me, Mrs. Avery adds, careful that the ribbon is blue to prevent mistaking it for a signal. He nods without looking directly at us, as if eye contact could be a breach. Is this the first such transfer? He asks. It is, I tell him, and hear a ledger line being written. We stop where the grass flattens against the wire. He matches us step for step inside, hands visible, barrel turned down. I repeat the captain's allowance, using his title and the phrases he used, because words with rank attached tend to soften sharp places. The guard repeats them back, then says he will signal the tower and await acknowledgement. We wait while crickets argue their tiny cases. A light blinks twice from the tower. The guard releases a breath, not quite relief. "Permission," he says again. He asks the recipient's name. We do not know it, and the truth lies between us like an uncovered table. Then he speaks it himself, consonants careful, and for an instant the wire seems to loosen because a person steps forward out of category. "Place the tin on the stool outside the boundary and step back 2 paces, he instructs. Mrs. Avery asks whether the pie will be shared by rule or assigned by discretion. He answers that food is inventoried and distributed according to orders, then adds, more quietly, that some items are better understood as occasions than as rations. "Thank you," she says, and the phrase hangs like another ribbon. I state again our names, our church, our intention. He repeats his name, his rank, his duty. "Permission," we both say, and the night assents in the language of insects and distant machinery. I set the tin down, the ribbon settling with a soft whisper, and step back beside the women, who stand with hands folded, as if at a graveside and a christening both. The guard lifts his chin to the tower, waits, and then takes 2 steps along his path, still parallel, as if the only way to move rightly is beside one another, with a fence between. From the vestibule the deacon appears with the old black ledger, and opens it to the month when peaches grew heavy. He holds it like a lantern, and runs his thumb down neat columns. Mrs. Avery, 10 ounces flour. Ruth Jenkins, 3 ounces sugar. The Bicknell twins, 12 pennies. A soldier's widow, 1 stick of butter, traded for sewing. My note, 2 jars of canned fruit surrendered. He lets me read, and the pie's warmth in my hands is answered by the heat of those lines. June 14th, June 22nd, June 29th, each a small decision to push against scarcity. I say aloud what the figures show. This dessert was assembled from unglamorous arithmetic, and if tonight asks what counts as aid or offence, the math has been public. The deacon taps a margin where he tallied spice. He even noted the ribbon, 2 cents at Tisdale's, paid from the youth group's coffee tin, to keep fingers from burning and the lid from rattling. Mrs. Avery adds that the peaches came from trees behind the parsonage and were peeled at the long table where we roll out communion bread. The cinnamon was begged, the lard portioned, the oven borrowed when the church stove sulked. By the fence, I see the ledger is less accounting than memory. It says these ounces were not free, these pennies not trivial. These dates witness that patience was spent on something meant to cross a boundary without breaking it. It names what sacrifice looks like in ounces and days. Nothing here is theatrical. The guard watches as the deacon turns a page and shows older columns for flour and sugar sent after funerals, for casseroles left when a birth came early, for envelopes folded around names when a mill closed and pay stopped. This book has always measured how we carry one another, I tell him, and tonight we are trying to carry someone who sleeps on his side of the wire. He does not answer, but his flashlight rests on the ink, and in that pale circle the plainness of our record rebukes drama. No slogans, no speeches, only units a child could count. Permission, he says, and the word touches the dates as if seeking a precedent. The deacon reads a line from last winter when we pooled sugar for a railroad cook who forgot to eat. We are not pretending there is no war, I say. We are insisting our arithmetic remain human. The ledger closes with a soft clap, and the deacon passes it to me like a responsibility. Its weight modest, its meaning plain. I promise to bring it tomorrow if anyone questions how a pie can be ordinary and decisive, and Mrs. Avery nods. Records keep tempers from deciding truth. Across the wire, a figure waits, and I picture how our numbers will soon become bites and breath, and maybe a remembered orchard, and how tonight's entry will read in the same narrow hand. July 3rd. 1 peach pie, ribbon 2 cents, purpose neighbor, outcome pending. Across the South, the war had turned every peach orchard and peanut row into a battlefield of its own, not with guns, but with quotas, paperwork, and German prisoners in sun-faded uniforms. After 1943, with labor shortages deepening, the War Department authorized POW labor contracts with civilian farms. On paper, a clean trade. Man-hours for produce, guard escorted, wage adjusted, tightly regulated. But in practice, it was sweat on cracked palms, and language fumbled between shovel and command, woven through with suspicion and necessity. Each man earned 80 cents a day, docked for rations, rarely spent, usually saved for the boat home no one could name. They moved from dawn to mid-afternoon between cotton, sorghum, and sweet potatoes, and were marched back through gates before the sun surrendered fully. Behind fences, their letters were censored, their conversations watched, their gestures decoded for signs of defiance, or worse, assimilation. One bulletin warned, "Be vigilant. Kindness may breed confusion." The paradox thickened in the dust of every truck bed. Government language spoke in clauses and contracts, requisitioned labor, authorized engagement, non-combatant productivity metrics. But the images told another story. Baskets heaped with fruit sat beside wire fences, where pale shirts hung like surrendered flags. Barbed coils framed tomato vines and tired backs. Watchtowers rose above watermelon rows. Orders forbade fraternization, yet buckets of extra yield were left too near the fence too often. In some counties, a pie was a violation. In others, an apology. In Sumter, it was somewhere in between. The economy of war depended on invisible lines, lines between paid and unpaid, enemy and neighbor, duty and discretion. A good crop meant praise for planners, but no one mentioned that it was German hands tying off bushels before the trucks arrived. The church knew this, so did the guards. What nobody said outright was that when you spend your days hauling sweet corn beside a man whose language you don't speak, the work wears you into something less than foreign. The women saw it too, in the stoop of a back, the bend of a wrist familiar from kin, long gone to uniformed dust. Rules were built to hold back sentiment, but food always tested the seal. The ribbon on our pie didn't just keep the lid in place, it kept a contradiction from unraveling. Because if this economy required their labor, and our manners required our mercy, then something had to stretch to fit both, and stretch it did, across paperwork, over barbed wire, into kitchens. Our pie was not a protest. It was a quiet proof that beneath requisition and regulation, a field always remembers the hands that cleared it, and sometimes a recipe remembers more than a regulation ever intended. Across the wire she waits, framed by the angled dusk and a cluster of women in faded camp dresses, each with their hands clasped behind their backs, in postures so disciplined they suggest drills rather than freedom. She is not tall, not young, not marked by anything beyond attention. Her face, unreadable from this distance, turns as the tin is placed on the stool, and when her eyes find the ribbon, something invisible shifts. The blue is not navy, not regulation, not anything found on a military map, but it is exact. Exactly the hue of the sanctuary quilts stitched last winter, the ones we sent to hospital wards and kept folded under pews in case of a birth or a storm. She sees it and nods once, as if the meaning requires no further handling. Around her, the other women wait, eyes flicking but bodies still, as if rehearsed. The guard murmurs to her, but she does not answer him. Her gaze rests on the ribbon the way you look at handwriting you recognize before you read the words. A printed sign nailed to the inside fence warns against contact, written in 2 languages, its corners curling from the humidity. Below it, grass grows unbothered. She steps forward only when instructed, slow and deliberate, as if aware of both the permission granted and the eyes measuring her use of it. When she reaches the stool, she does not touch the tin immediately. Instead, she looks past it, not to us, but to the church porch still visible across the road, lit now with lamplight and moths. Then she lifts the pie, careful, reverent, and holds it to her chest with both hands, the ribbon a soft arc across her knuckles. The moment stretches not because it is theatrical, but because no one wants to interrupt it. A rule is printed in tin, in signage, in post orders, but what just passed between us was written nowhere, only in color, in thread, in recognition. She turns and walks back toward the others, one woman's shoulder brushing hers. There is no applause, no saluting, no commentary. Only the sound of insects returning to full volume now that the human silence is done. We begin to step back as well, not speaking, because what was said tonight was said without mouth or ink. The MP logs the time. The guard watches the ribbon fade into the dark. Somewhere inside the fence, a woman who peeled potatoes at noon now carries a message that smells of cinnamon and sun. And in that small nod, blue cloth to blue cloth, everything unsanctioned and essential has already been understood. The letter was dated May 16th, 1944, written in a tight, slanted hand on coarse paper folded into quarters and translated weeks later by a chaplain fluent in Swabian dialect. It had passed through 2 inspections, one military, one ecclesiastical, before being archived with dozens like it in the church office filing cabinet labeled Camp Correspondence Summer. From the 3rd paragraph, amid a list of labor assignments and a politely veiled inquiry about her family's welfare, one line emerged with the clarity of memory distilled. The peaches here remind me of the trees behind my grandmother's kitchen, where we were scolded for shaking them too early. The handwriting beneath it loops slightly, as if the writer paused, perhaps smiling. The chaplain underlined the line when he translated it and added a marginal note. Sentimental detail, likely genuine. It was that sentence, no plea, no complaint, that stayed with us, that traveled more reliably than orders or maps. It made its way into planning meetings and shopping lists, into the choice of pie over cobbler, and into the precise shade of blue selected for the ribbon. Not because it was profound, but because it was exact. Memory anchoring identity, fruit turning into witness, peaches becoming the quiet thread that tied one orchard to another, across a fence. By August of that year, Sumter County had reported a surplus yield of over 24,000 bushels of peaches. Early rains and mild nights had coaxed the orchards into overproduction, and the agricultural bulletins spoke in crisp numerical pride: pounds per tree, crates per acre, shipments per rail car. A single orchard could send 800 crates in a week, bound for northern canneries and military depots. Federal procurement officers tallied tonnage in quarter-ton increments, matched to transportation charts and fuel allowances. Meanwhile, within the camp, the rations per head were fixed. 2,900 calories per day, calculated for laborers, adjusted by age and task. Sugar was measured to the gram, protein to the ounce. The camp kitchen boiled figures into sustenance with mechanical regularity. Against all that, this geometry of feeding and producing, of requisitioned labor and contract deadlines, our pie was absurdly small. 1 tin, perhaps 4 servings if divided carefully. No nutritional impact, no logistical utility, and yet it required more effort than a freight order, approval from officers, justification through scripture and ledger, and a transfer carried out with near liturgical precision. The contrast was startling. Policy moved in decimals and clauses. Mercy moved in gestures and memory. That pie, sitting ribbon-bound on a stool outside the fence, was dwarfed by the mathematics of war. But in its weightless defiance, it measured something policy couldn't. What it means when a community chooses to notice someone they are not required to see. The pie could not feed the camp, but it could feed something else. At 7:33, the captain's voice cut through the dusk with a finality that silenced even the insects. Non-contact transfer authorized. No further explanation followed. No ceremony. The words dropped like a gavel, and movement resumed in their wake. The guard stepped forward with practiced precision, his boots whispering through the crushed gravel, and took the pie from the stool where it had briefly rested in neutral territory. The blue ribbon held. He did not look at us. He did not look at her. He simply turned, walked 6 measured paces, and placed the tin on the ground inside the wire, exactly where she had been instructed to wait. She stepped forward without hesitation, bent smoothly, and picked it up. Their hands never touched. Their gazes did not meet. There was no handshake, no words, only a nod, hers slight, almost imperceptible, his slower, as if to acknowledge not just the act, but the precision required to make it permissible. Then they both turned, back straight, roles intact. The women behind me exhaled as one. No rule had been broken, not technically. The pie had changed sides, not through defiance, but through choreography. And yet we all knew. Something more than food had passed between the fences. Something that did not need to be named. "Return to barracks." The command echoed once more across the fence line. Same cadence, same authority. But it sounded different now. Stripped of its finality, softened by the act it had just permitted. The guards still moved with practiced discipline. The internees still turned in file, and the wire still hummed its dividing line. But between the syllables, something had changed. It was not the phrase itself. It was how we heard it, how we felt its edges round off slightly in the wake of a nod and a transfer that obeyed every rule but fulfilled another purpose entirely. She did not glance back as she carried the pie toward the compound, yet the blue ribbon caught in the low light and fluttered just enough to seem like a sign. The other women followed behind her, step for step, until they vanished behind the barracks wall, order intact. And still the words, "Return to barracks," hung in the air like a hymn's final note, one that no longer meant retreat or silence, but completion. The line had bracketed a rule-bound world, yet tonight it had also framed a fleeting act of mercy. Same voice, same uniform, same command, but the meaning had ripened as surely as the peaches had. In the church archive box labeled Camp Socials and Correspondence 1944, the evidence rests without commentary, just papers, dates, and ink. A yellowed newspaper clipping from the America's Times Recorder reports a decrease in disciplinary incidents at the POW camp that month, attributing it vaguely to improved morale among interned laborers. A second article, clipped from a statewide agricultural bulletin, praises the efficient harvests aided by disciplined, reliable non-citizen workers, though it never names them. Below that, a mimeographed inventory slip lists tools returned undamaged from a work crew that had passed through town 3 weeks prior. An anomaly noted by the officer in margin scrawl. 0 losses, first time. Mark pattern? Then there is the chaplain's note, folded 3 times, and still faintly scented with candle smoke, likely written the same night as the pie delivery. It reads simply, "Sometimes mercy achieves what instruction cannot. 1 pie, no breach, but a visible lessening of tension." His handwriting is thin, almost apologetic, but beneath it he has penciled a list of women who contributed ingredients, as if reminding himself that proof sometimes arrives in grams, not proclamations. Another paper, an internal memo from a camp sergeant, records that the next week's work detail returned 5 minutes early. In good spirits, no corrections issued. Each scrap, each tally, points to the same quiet thesis, that the line between order and humanity narrows in the presence of small, deliberate kindnesses. The fence did not change, but the workdays grew steadier. The tools were returned, the voices lowered their pitch. And all of it, this subtle shift from tension to tolerable coexistence, is archived not in declarations, but in the paper trail of a community that kept its own kind of score. We thought we were managing behavior with rules. We thought boundaries were taught through fences, schedules and codes of conduct enforced by rank and wire. But it wasn't the signage or the rations or the training that made the difference here. What steadied the days, what lowered the temperature at the gates and softened the pace of the fieldwork, was not anything born of command. It was hospitality, not softness, not naivety. True hospitality, the kind that asks nothing but sees everything. It moved in pies and ribbons, in names spoken carefully, in sugar pooled from homes that had none to spare. The contradiction reveals itself only now, in retrospect, that humanity was taught not by propaganda, but by the absence of it, by sincerity, that in a time when deception was expected and manipulation routine, a simple act of welcome, without agenda, without subtext, became the most profound and disarming language of all. They learned the boundary, not through sermons or leaflets, but because someone baked them something warm and said nothing about it. They understood decency not as performance, but as provision. The pie crossed a fence, yes, but more than that, it crossed the assumption that a prisoner can only be corrected by force, that empathy and enforcement must always be at odds. Tonight proved otherwise, and that is the deepest learning of all. In the months that followed, what began as one careful act by a church social became something quieter, but far more expansive. The guard logs showed fewer delays at the gates and fewer raised voices at tool checks. Field supervisors reported smoother transitions between sites, less resistance at the end of long days, and, curiously,